Hi, this is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel. And today's show, we're going to take a deep dive into America from lockdown to meltdown. We're going to examine what's happening in America with a perspective both from me outside looking in and also from within America itself. And to help me in the show, I'm joined by a special guest, Chicago lawyer and broadcaster, Josh Kantrow. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Barry, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks for joining me on the View from Israel. You know, in all the obviously, Josh, you and I know each other because I appreciate the work you've done as a pro-Israel advocate, and we've met once or twice. And I enjoy it whenever you come to Israel. We manage to get together and exchange sound bites and information. So let's get to it. Let's begin by comparing the Wuhan virus. Incidentally, I guess, Josh, tell me, I have to be a little more nuanced in the way I talk. We may have a difficulty in language. You know, who is it? Winston Churchill once said that America and Britain is two countries divided by a common language. So, I mean, we Israelis are known for straight talk. We call it in Hebrew dogri over here. And in England, for our viewers in England, they call it straight talk. If you're from the north of England, they call a spade a spade. In fact, some of them are more brutal than that, call it a bloody shovel. And for our viewers in Australia, are also known for straight talking as well. But I understand that perhaps freedom of speech are being challenged. So maybe we have to be more nuance. And I don't know if you're at liberty to talk dugri, as we say, or call a spade, or whether you have to be a little bit more cautious over there. You tell me.
Well, unfortunately, what we're seeing in America over the past 6 weeks, especially since the George Floyd incident, is really an attack on free speech, coming only from one side, though. If you are conservative, if you are pro-Israel, if you are in favor of express support for law enforcement, you can get into a lot of trouble. And I don't know if you're familiar with the site Real Clear Politics, but it's a great site that provides perspectives from both sides every day. And they have added in the past week or so to their site a section which outlines 4 or 5 incidents that happened the previous day on cancel culture. And that is where somebody is fired from their job at a university or a business or professionally or the like for expressing conservative or even not necessarily conservative views, moderate views. And it's happening to people on the left. So unfortunately, we are in a situation here in America where you kind of have to be careful what you say. I have an active Facebook blog. I write. I appear on shows like this, and that's where we are right now.
It's shocking and it's staggering to us in Western democracies to see what's going on in the States. Just before I came on air, I was horrified to read a story of a young mother, white, who was walking and Black Lives Matter gang came back chanting Black Lives Matter, and she jokingly said, "All lives matter," and she got shot in the head and she's dead. I mean, it's
Wow.
horrendous that in a place like America, you can't say an expression. These were her final words: "All lives matter," and she got killed, shot in the head by this Black Lives Matter mob. These people are taking over not just thought and speech, but also politics, as we'll go into later on. And it's highly troubling for the free world, for Western democracies, to witness what's going on in America. We'll come on to that, but I just wanted to make some comparisons here. We had a big demonstration yesterday in Tel Aviv by a lot of people who are unemployed now. They were self-employed and small business owners in their thousands, because the Israeli government haven't come through with the money that they promised them, and people are finding it hard to eat right here. But what happened is Israel got off to a very good start, better than most other countries. We closed down the country pretty quickly, both internally and externally, by cutting out incoming flights, and they began to concentrate on hotspots. And Lawrence, our producer, this show is being produced by. You're in America, in Chicago. I'm in Israel, and our producers in Stockholm, Sweden. And about in May, I had a chat, a conversation with a Swedish doctor, and we compared how Israel was doing with Sweden. And in Sweden, they use the herd immunity, keeping businesses open and let people mingle and infect each other. But their death toll was over 4,000, and the population is more or less the same. And he looked at it as a success. And ours was at that time under 300. Now, why is it interesting to make a comparison with Israel and where you are, Josh, in Chicago, is because your city has a population of 8.8 million. We have a population just approaching 9.3 million. So you've had about 55,000 confirmed infected, and Israel has had 34,000. And your death rate, I understand up till now, is a figure I dragged off the computer this morning, stands at 2,666, right? I don't know if you've got the comparison. Right. The Israeli fatalities from this virus is 358 as of 20 minutes ago. So if we had over 2,000 fatalities, this would be considered in Israel to be a national tragedy and a government failure. How are your authorities, your city, your health department and mayor treating these sort of figures? Success, failure, or just accepting it?
I don't think they're treating it as a success really or a failure. I think that the mayor and the governor and the president, everybody on down in this country is they're trying to balance the economic versus the death rate. I would say that our mayor and our governor have spent a whole lot of time criticizing the federal government and President Trump in particular in order to score political points. And I'd like to see them spend more time figuring out a way to balance the economic versus the health. And they don't seem to be doing such a great job of either. There's a healthy debate in this country. And Chicago is sort of the epicenter of it because we have major medical institutions here, and two of the top 10 universities in the country are located in Chicago. And there are views all over the place, including views that have been expressed that support the Sweden herd immunity model, which I happen to support, but I'm not an expert. I believe that Sweden went the right way. But the death rate in Israel versus Chicago speaks volumes based on similar populations. Israel is doing something right that we're not.
Tell me, did you hear anything, Josh, in Chicago where the mayor or the governor sent infected patients into nursing homes? Because I understand that about 40% of the fatalities are in nursing homes. I don't know if it's the same situation they had in New York, where Andrew Cuomo insisted that infected people went into nursing homes, which was an absolute killer mistake.
I agreed with you that is what Cuomo did, and that it was a killer mistake. And I don't believe the same thing happened here in Chicago and Illinois, but I know it did in Pennsylvania. And it just absolutely makes no sense when you have 40% of the U.S. population dying from COVID. let me rephrase that. When you have nursing homes contributing 40% of the deaths, overall COVID deaths, you could isolate the nursing homes. You could put protective measures in place, very strict measures in place around nursing homes. And the elderly and vulnerable and the people with pre-existing conditions, but generally let the rest of the population go on with their lives with appropriate precautions like social distancing and wearing masks. That is not what's happened here in Chicago, and it's not happened generally in America. And I think it's just a real shame.
I think this is where we come on to a little bit of the hypocrisy. I don't know if you agree with me, but I would pose this, that if President Trump had signed an order saying infected cases must be sent into nursing homes to keep beds in hospitals free, resulting in tens of thousands of deaths from infected elderly in old age home, I am absolutely certain that the Democratic Party would be begging for his head and having impeachment and doing all sorts of things. And yet when these orders are given by Andrew Cuomo, or they're given by the Director of Health of Pennsylvania under Tom Wolf, it's a given. No, and I discussed this with Lawrence, our producer, before we came on air, because I'm right in saying that the Director of Health, when he or she gave the order to send infected patients into nursing homes and specific nursing homes, she in fact removed her 92-year-old mother from one of the nursing homes, which indicates what? She must have been
That is
aware of the danger.
absolutely. You have nailed one of the top five, maybe the top examples of hypocrisy that has come out of this COVID. I mean, I could go on and on about others like Bill de Blasio shutting down gyms and schools in the city, but still uh, going on and using his gym and ordering them to open for him. That's the New York City mayor, for those of you who don't know. But what the Pennsylvania health director did, and these are just facts. This is not. Yes, I'm a right of center um, uh, from an opinion standpoint, but what you just said was a fact, and I posted that on Facebook and I talked about it on other shows. This 91-year-old uh, mother of the Pennsylvania health director got out while she was sending other people to their deaths. This person, in my view, should be prosecuted.
Let's talk about a couple of other cases of hypocrisy, if I may, and I'll keep it in Chicago. I understand that your mayor, Mrs. Lightfoot, imposed punishment on any small business owner who dared infringe authoritarian lockdown, but asked that a beauty parlor owner open up just for her so she could have her hair done. In other words, she was punishing other beauty parlor owners if they needed to open up in order to help feed their family. But she asked for one beauty parlor to do her own hair. And when she was confronted with this, she said, I'm the public face of the city. This is your city, Josh. I'm on national media and I'm in the public eye. I'm a person who I take my personal hygiene very seriously. As I said, I felt I needed to have a haircut. This is
Yes,
the height of authoritative Democrat hypocrisy.
again, Barry, what you have done is you have cited facts. Okay, that it is a fact that Mayor Lightfoot prevented everyone else in the city from getting a haircut, but broke the rules just like Mayor de Blasio did because he needs to go to the gym every day. She felt like she was more important than everyone else and that she could get her haircut. But I want to also touch on this. Mayor Lightfoot has spent her career in either government service as a prosecutor or as a private attorney as a law firm. She's never worked in a small business. We have too few public servants in America generally, but especially those running the large cities and states who have private sector experience. And I'm not talking about big businesses, but small businesses. And that is showing up in how this country has responded. The small businesses have been punished. 30% of restaurants in America, according to the latest survey, will never reopen again. And that is just a really sad thing. And I could go on and on about other retail. But the hypocrisy here in Chicago doesn't extend just to our mayor, but to our governor. Our governor imposed one of the earliest lockdowns in America, okay, back in, I believe, mid-March. And he said, no one can travel, stay in your home, you can go out for physical exercise for 30 minutes a day, but come back. You can't go to work except for certain businesses, etc. What was his own family doing? Flouting that order. Our mayor is a Hyatt hotel heir, and he inherited $3 billion the day he was born, essentially, and he's never had to really work a day in his life. He's got properties all over America. His wife fled to their estate in Florida on the grounds that she had to take care of their horses down there. They have a horse estate down there. And Florida at the time had very loose restrictions. So she fled Chicago. Some of his kids went up to their place in Wisconsin on Lake Geneva to get away. And meanwhile, he's imposing travel restrictions on us. This is what happens when you have Democrat-run cities and states. And here in Illinois, I mean, it is Democrat top down. They have a super majority in the legislature, and what they're getting away with, not just on COVID, but on other issues, is remarkable.
It seems to me, but you can tell the sort of research I've done in preparation for my talk with you about Chicago, because maybe you could throw more light about this. I've got a note here that a Democrat city alderman, I think his name was Raymond Topaz of the 15th district, had bricks thrown into his house window, his window at home, and his neighbor's garage was set on fire. I don't know whether this had to do with the general violence going on in Chicago. It had to do with the Black Lives Matter protest. This was days after he was caught on tape demanding an answer from the mayor, from Lightfoot, on why she hadn't responded affirmatively enough to this violence. And she replied that he was full of BS, bullshit. And funny enough, on the same time, there's a Jasmine Scott who's now living in a motel after gunmen shot her front door and a Molotov cocktail was thrown into a car window, setting it ablaze. And yet it seems that Illinois and Chicago Republicans really are so weak and ineffectual that they can't pronounce a more effective policy for the violence in the city of Chicago and in the state of Illinois. Do you know about these incidents?
I do know about those incidents, and what happened to Alderman Lopez was just really, really a sad situation. The Chicago City Council is comprised of 50 Democrats. The mayor is a Democrat. There are no Republicans on the city council. He is an independent voice, though, and I applaud him for that. But for speaking out and for this, Mayor Lightfoot, we have an open meetings law. City council meetings are supposed to be open to the public. She tried to close this one. And this tape leaked out of her just losing it on him because he dared question the conventional wisdom, and then violence is directed at his property. This is, I mean, George Orwell talked about this back 70 years ago when he wrote 1984. We are reaching totalitarian control here in Chicago. And unfortunately, the Republican Party is just pathetic, not only in the city of Chicago, but the state. They are ineffectual. They are weak. They have played a large part of the problems that beset our state now because they are more concerned with their own reelection and towing the party line and not getting into too much trouble with the politically correct police out there. And it's just, this is what happens. This is an example of what happens when you have one party rule. And my concern getting into the national politics for a minute is this. We're on a path, unless President Trump can change the trajectory of this race, due to the fact that they have tried to hound him out of office for 4 years through the fake impeachment, through the Russian collusion hoax, through the spying on his campaign even before he became president, through all these classified media leaks and the like. Then he gets hit with two twice in a century crises at the same time, a pandemic and um, racial violence that we haven't seen in America since the late 1960s. His poll numbers are sagging, and we're on our way to having a Democrat administration, a Democratic controlled Senate, and a Democratic controlled House. And if you want to see what America could look like once all that happens, just take a look at Chicago. Chicago, which has been under total Democratic control since 1932 and is among the most violent cities in the world, not just America, but in the world. And the state of Illinois, which has the worst is in the worst financial situation of any state in the country, and which has been under total Democratic control as far as the House of Representatives in Illinois for 40 out of the past 42 years, the Senate for about the past 20 years, and governors for about 12 out of the past 16 years. So this is a warning. I wish Americans would take a closer look at Illinois and Chicago before they cast their vote in November.
Well, you know, we talk about hypocrisy, Josh, but what strikes me as being utter hypocrisy is having cities like yours, New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, all the others, democratic cities, who insist that all law-abiding citizens must go into lockdown. You can't run your business or anything. But then they allow unbridled, unlimited mass protests, which break into riots, violence, destruction, and looting. And you have mayors, I don't know what Michael said about this, but certainly people like de Blasio almost like praise it. And then he comes back and starts demanding that other small businesses, again, go back into lockdown. I really don't understand from an outside point of view why small business owners, unemployed people who are unemployed because of this, self-employed people do not go out on the streets and protest peacefully. Because if people like de Blasio and Lightfoot and other mayors, Wolf and others, allow civil rights protests, surely it's a civil rights for people to go out on the streets and say, enough is enough, we have to eat. So it's a question of which side of the political agenda you're on.
Barry, you raise a great point. You know, there were some small business owners going out in April and marching on state capitals and the like, and they were criticized by the public health officials. You can't do this. You're spreading the virus, all of this stuff. But when the protest over George Floyd broke out, and by the way, I want to be clear on the record that I support the legitimate right to protest. That's part of our First Amendment rights in this country. And while I don't agree with much of the Black Lives Matter platform, I do believe that people had a right to go out and protest. But they were praised by the media and by the same public health officials who didn't like the small business owners going out and protesting, and nary a word about the health concerns and the like with spreading COVID through these protests. So that is a real example of hypocrisy. I have been surprised, though, that there hasn't been more by the small business community in terms of protests, in terms of writing op-eds, in terms of getting out on TV and radio, and the like. And it is a bit disconcerting to me because I think what's happening is that they're seeing that those who do go out and protest and write and make their views known are getting targeted by the politically correct police, and indeed their businesses are subject to being shut down either through regulation or phony inspections, or by customers who just aren't going to frequent those businesses if they don't toe the party line.
Well, you may not like this, Josh, but I have to tell you that Chicago, in my earlier days, used to be referred to as the Windy City. But these days, I don't know in the States, but outside the States, Chicago is now called the murder capital of the world. And statistics that I dug up for this show with you shows that the Chicago murder rate has up 125% from the same time last year. Now, do you know what the reason for this is? Is it people who are criminally inclined to be more emboldened because of the riots and everything they've seen going on around America, or what's the reason for this? Because I don't think the murder rate that's going on is a slightly separate issue from the riots and the looting and the arson that's going on with the nationally in support of Black Lives Matter.
I think there's a lot of linkage between what's going on with uh, the uh, the increased murder rate in Chicago and the protests and the riots and the looting, because what's happening is there is a real anti-police movement that is being ginned up in this country, and police officers are scared to do their job, and they're not. They don't want to be caught on tape. They don't want to be the next ones prosecuted. Uh, and what's happening is that they're just kind of letting things go. And that's my speculation. I can't prove it, but I don't believe, aggressive policing. And I'm not saying they should violate the law, but aggressive policing saves lives. It doesn't lead to death. And there's a way to do it that stays within the confines of the law, and there's a way to do it that doesn't. And the way that uh, the police officer in Minneapolis handled George Floyd is the way not to do it. And I don't disagree at all that he should be prosecuted. Okay, but what's happening is I just picked up the new paper today in advance of our call. Another teenager was shot and killed in Chicago as a result of gang wars. That's almost an everyday occurrence in this city. That is really, really sad. And it's not unique to Chicago. It's happening all over America. Chicago may have the most murders, but on a per capita basis, there are mid-sized cities in America that have a much higher murder rate than Chicago does.
But I want to tell you, like you said, your city has been Democrat for decades. With the condition of the African Americans in the inner cities, with the crime rate so high, I am staggered. I cannot understand why I would consider sensible people in Chicago would say to themselves, look, enough of the Democrats. We're getting nowhere with them. Let's give the Republicans a chance. I mean, why are they so stubbornly Democratic when your city is the crime capital of the world, the murder capital of the world? People are getting shot every weekend or whatever. Why can't they decide to go, let's give the alternative a chance? Are the Republican Party so weak in the state of Illinois and in Chicago that they can't make their case?
Well, the Republican Party in the city of Chicago is almost non-existent. I mean, I know Republicans here, but most of them are in the closet because they're too scared to speak out. And they quietly cheer me on from the sidelines. But so I see a lot of weakness there. You know, they will send me things that they want me to post on my blog or say on radio or TV or the like, but they'll never like or comment on it publicly. They're just some of the weakest people I know. But in any event, you're dealing with, uh, again, since 1932, Chicago has had Democratic mayors and 98, 99% control of the city council. That is a long entrenched history. It's based on root organizations who are very entrenched. And to go in and to try to change that would be very hard to do. So I am critical of the Republican Party, particularly here in Chicago. If you look at the state more broadly, though, however, Illinois has had more Republican governors than Democrat governors over the past 30 years or so. And if you get out of the Chicago metropolitan region and you look at those county maps that um, uh, are typically shown during presidential elections, even when Republicans lose, you know, it's deep red. I mean, most counties in this country are red counties. It's only the urban areas that are blue. And the same holds true in Illinois. If you look at 2016, Trump lost Illinois by maybe 1 million votes, but on a county by county basis, he probably won 58 or 59 of the 62 counties in the state. But it just so happens that the Chicago metropolitan region accounts for 9 million of the 12 million people that live in the state. So again, there are Republicans here, but the party has been decimated.
Well, I don't, again, Josh, it occurs to me that in a backdrop of total abject, endemic democratic failure, you would have think that people who, okay, even don't want to vote Republican would say enough. There's no way I can continue voting Democrat this year. You would think they would walk away or stay away, even if they had. But you telling me with everything going on, are people not aware that their failure is really endemic to the way that your city and the state has been run, rather than who is sitting in the White House, that they would still go to the polls in November and vote for this failure and inept Democrat leadership?
Unfortunately, they will. I mean, most of them uh, either just read the headlines and the media is like, there was a recent study, 90%, 92% of media coverage of President Trump has been negative, despite all the positive things that he's done in this country. And that's certainly true. That's a nationwide basis, but that would certainly be true in Chicago. Here in Illinois, our leading paper is the Chicago Tribune, where there's only one conservative columnist out of like 11 that regularly contributes to the paper. And the Democratic Party just promises a lot of free stuff. They are in cahoots with the public employee unions. Illinois is a state run by and for public employee unions. And they have been promised so many jobs and goodies and pensions and the like that they're going to organize and turn out the army of voters to keep those goodies coming. And they don't really care about, I hate to say it, about all of these poor um, uh, black and minority kids who are being killed. They are more concerned with their own self-preservation. I think what could happen, however, in Illinois or Chicago is that you could have an independent Democrat run on a new platform that focuses more on really trying to solve these issues and more of a pro-business platform, and calls out the public employee unions for their contribution to the mess that we're in. And I'm talking about all the way down the line. So much of our budget is sucked out to pay for overly generous pensions where people can retire at the age of 50 and get full pensions for life, that there's not enough money for all the things that the liberal, that the left wants in terms of education, in terms of social workers, etc., to help these communities of color.
Well, yeah, I read a piece in the American Thinker which said that 500,000, mostly middle-class New Yorkers had fled the city due to the failed Democrat leadership at the city and state level also, and also from the rising crime rate. 500,000, Josh, is the number which is greater than the population of Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed. Minneapolis is gradually turning into Mogadishu under the reign of people like Ilhan Omar. That's her hometown. What's the situation in Chicago? Are people getting so disgruntled by seeing no hope, no light at the end of the tunnel there, that they're packing up and leaving Illinois or Chicago for more peaceful pastures?
Barry, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for mentioning American Thinker. It's a great publication that I contribute a number of articles to, and I just wrote something that was published today in American Thinker. But yes, people are leaving Chicago in droves in Illinois. Um, on a per capita basis, I think it's the highest of any state in the country. New York's numbers are skewed a bit because they're a larger state. But here in Chicago, the sad reality is that the majority of people who are leaving, guess who they are? It's the black middle class, and that is the demographic that we need not only to stay but to build, and we need more black middle class in Chicago. And unfortunately, they are leaving either for safer suburbs or moving out of state altogether. That's just the sad reality. And but it's happening in a lot of states, like big Democrat run states with huge public employee uh, influence, like New York, Chicago, Connecticut, etc. California is a bit different. They have similar issues there, but California is a beautiful state with great weather and beaches and mountains and the like. So it's easier for people to justify and stay there. But Illinois, Connecticut, New York, um, states that are in big, big trouble. And eventually, there's not going to be enough people left here to pay the bills. And so they're going to come to the federal government for handouts. And the question is, who gets there first? Um, because whoever gets there first might get the handout, but when the American people see what's going on, they're going to they're going to stop it. They're a well-run. If you live in a well-run state, why would you want to subsidize Illinois or bail out Illinois?
Well, you mentioned California, but I want to tell you, California also have people who are fleeing California for the very same reasons. They've got things like sanctuary cities and things like that, which are also, allowing illegal immigrants and criminals to patrol the streets over there virtually, and homeless on the streets. So a lot of people, same sort of middle class and maybe more, fleeing California for other states, whether it's Texas, Florida, or whatever. So I can't see that people would leave Chicago because of the failed politics and policies and go to California, have the same situation. It was like when you go to New York as well and have de Blasio as your mayor. Um, but
Agreed.
all right, but if you want to, moving it along a little bit, if you want to talk about another sort of hypocrisy that we mentioned about coming on to like the protests that are okay for Democrat mayors and governors, but then won't allow you to go to the beach or whatever. But in Chicago itself, just a week ago, one of the how many people were killed about 4th of July weekend? I can't 17 people killed, 80 shootings or something like that, and there were a number of kids killed. There was a 7-year-old girl called Natalia Wallace who was gunned down about a week ago. She was one just of too many kids that have been murdered by the mob or people over there. And what you didn't hear was any condolences to the parents of this girl from Black Lives Matter organization.
Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupt you. I was just
No.
going to say you pointed out another hypocrisy, Barry, and your statistics are again unfortunately accurate. 17 deaths, 80 shootings, a 7-year-old girl that died, young girl that died over the 4th of July weekend. Massive protests coming out for the death of George Floyd. Um, but nobody's protesting this poor girl and all these other people that are dying. Where are Black Lives Matter protesting black on black crime? You just don't see it, and it's just it says everything. It
But
speaks a lot about the organization, unfortunately.
Well, I'm coming gradually onto the organization. I want to give our viewers a reality check on Black Lives Matter, the organization. But before I do that, just to emphasize the point I made, I was really shocked when I saw the father of the 19-year-old boy who was gunned down in Seattle in the Black Lives Matter autonomous zone, which was, they said, not part of the United States of America, where the mayor of Seattle said this was going to turn into a summer of love. And it turned out to be a summer of rape, murder, and extortion. And this 19-year-old boy's father, I was shocked by the fact that it took him over a week to be allowed to go to the morgue to identify his son. And he got no phone call of condolences, not from the mayor of Seattle and not from Black Lives Matter. I thought Black Lives Matter mattered to Black Lives Matter organization. Obviously, it doesn't. And this is why, in some of the articles that I write, I call the organization BLM for what it is Black Lives Matter. This here may be a little bit provocative here, but people have got to have a reality check. So again, we see it over and over again, the hypocrisy about these people who claim to be supporting the better lives for the blacks in the inner communities. And if they wanted to do that, they couldn't do any better. They're actually even demanding of the president to spend more of his resources in the inner cities. It's a president that, quite frankly, what I can see from an outside point of view, maybe you can reflect on this, has done more for the black communities in the 3 years he's been in power than Biden did in a whole of 8 years, 2 terms of this. What's your take on that?
Picking up on your last statement, I agree with you 100%. This president, before COVID hit, had the minority unemployment rate. I'm talking about people of color across the whole spectrum, whether they're black, Hispanic, Asian, etc., down to record low levels. In fact, we couldn't find people to fill jobs here in this country. It was incredible. It was down to like 2.5%. And then the COVID and lockdown hit. But we're rebounding. And what he has done for people of color has been really remarkable. He also took the step of unwinding Clinton era, mid 90s punitive uh, incarceration uh, laws that had put poor urban black young men in jail, in some cases for life, through bipartisan legislation, but that he led, that his administration led and crafted to wind down some of those programs and get these people out of jail and back into new lives, into better lives. There were polls before COVID hit and before George Floyd where President Trump was polling 33% in the African American community. He was doing so much toward the black community. I do want to say something about Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter there are many Black Lives Matter organizations. I know some of the activists affiliated with Black Lives Matter. Some of them are great people. Their hearts are in the right places and they're doing amazing work. So I don't want to paint the organization with too broad of a brush. There are strains of anti-Semitism in the organization that concern me greatly. And as you point out, there are hypocrisies that cannot be denied. And it's just a real shame that so much of the focus tends to be on law enforcement, but not actual measures that can help and save Black lives.
Well, okay. Well, I want to make at this point, I want to make it perfectly clear. I think as our viewers are listening, we're speaking up here about the horror of black lives that are being killed. And I can't understand, certainly, for instance, for George Floyd. Everybody, but everybody, right and left, Republicans, Democrats, whatever, people from within America and outside of America were absolutely horrified by the scene of what they watched over there. But to have people like me, an Israeli white Jew, and you, an American white Jew, call out why more isn't being done for the African American and the minorities in the inner cities, um, really dispels the lie that if you're white, you're a racist. That's one of the fraudulent claims of Black Lives Matter. I just want to make a quick note here, as I've done in other programs. I think what we're seeing I come from a strategic and intelligent sort of background as well. And what we're seeing in America from an outside perspective, dispassionate, you call it if you want, is a replay of what we see with other insurgency movements, whether it's communist or whether it's Islamist or whatever. And it's based on a number of factors, and I'm going to mention this to you, Josh, and also to our viewers as well to watch out for, because they hide their real agenda by what I call the 4 Ds, the letter Ds. There's deception, disinformation, disruption, and demoralization. Deception is hiding the real cause, the real agenda, what they're really after. Disinformation is broadcasting messages that attracts the masses while slandering anyone who opposes you. In America's case, that includes your president, who has been slandered and pilloried, as you mentioned before, since day one. But it also includes people like you. And I don't know if you're aware of the noxious atmosphere that's spreading fast around America, that if you say anything that's displeasing to them, that you mentioned earlier on, you could be in danger of losing your job. What do you think about that before I head on to some other factors regarding the identity of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, you're right. People are at risk for speaking out, and that's why a lot of folks aren't. There's a theory that um, come November, all of these folks are going to speak out at the polls, and hopefully that will happen. But it is such a sad state of affairs in this country that if you express a viewpoint that is conservative, that if you criticize certain aspects of Black Lives Matter while supporting other aspects of what they're trying to do, you're branded one way or the other, and it's just it's dispiriting. We're at a point in this country where um, it's sort of a replay of the mid to late 60s in many cases, but on steroids. And the Democratic Party and the far left, which is pretty much taken over that party, are have an agenda that is not really does not comport with what this country stands for. But unfortunately, you mentioned the 4 Ds. I think they're so far they seem to be getting away with it.
What do you think generally the attitude or the idea of the rank and file American is to the Black Lives Matter movement? What do they know about it, or what do they think it is?
I can't speak for the Black Lives Matter movement and what they think, and I can't get involved in. I would just be speculating there. Um, what what I am seeing from the outside is a movement that um, you know. Look, there's no doubt that there have been injustices committed against African Americans in this country from the moment this country was founded. Okay, and there has been no doubt that those injustices, a lot of them exist today, and there are people of good faith on all sides of the political aisle who are trying to solve those issues. But it doesn't help the cause to go out and resort to violence. Martin Luther King was incredible in the way that he led a nonviolent movement. Rioting and looting was something that he condemned back in his day, but we're not seeing enough of that condemnation today. In fact, we're seeing basically cheerleading of it and excuse making for it. And that is disheartening. And that shouldn't be a political issue. That should just be from a standpoint of civil society, to see rioting and looting and small businesses that have been just decimated by this COVID lockdown crisis. Getting double hit like this is awful.
The leaders of Black Lives Matter, the organization, if anybody cares to look, are self-described Marxist leaders. They've said it themselves. It's not socialist, Marxist. And they are leading the Democratic Party from the outside. They have no intention of creating their own political party to take power. They're going to ride into power within what I call the Trojan horse of the Democrat Party, that they control, as we've seen, both at city and state level. All they have to do is make their demands, and the mayors and the governors kowtow to what they want. And they're going to come into power. And what you're going to see will, if they do take power in November, is something a lot more frightening than even if Bernie Sanders would have been in charge. It's going to be far more radical when it comes to this. And I don't know whether you, Josh, or any of our other viewers in America who know about the influence that Black Lives Matter already having, not just in the universities, because I've been one of those that have been battling about free speech that's been denied by conservative voices or even pro-Israel voices on campuses. But what's going on in the education system, I don't know. Do you know, Josh, do you have any kids who are still in school?
I have a daughter that just graduated from university last month, and she's gainfully employed. She's starting work next month, and I've got two boys in high school right now. But I am well familiar with what's going on in the universities, and I think you described it well. This is a project that has been going on since the mid '60s, and it was reversed somewhat in terms of restoring free speech and restoring, having some balance in universities back in the 80s with the Reagan Revolution, which continued. Really, Reagan had 3 terms. George H.W. Bush completed Reagan's 3rd term. He was such an iconic, amazing president. And I'm speaking about Ronald Reagan. But then it gained renewed steam, I would say, back when Obama was elected. And our universities are just a hotbed of radicalism. And it's not just limited to Black Lives Matter, but it's across the far left political spectrum. They're taking over the universities in America and educating young minds. It doesn't matter what class you're in, whether it's physics or engineering or economics or social science or whatever. Professors are free to express their far left Marxist viewpoints. But if you try to get a conservative on campus like Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or the like, their very lives are at risk. And that's been going on for years.
What concerns me is that I've spoken about this for a long time, about the radical professors and lecturers on campuses, which have been, we call the industry of lies, who have been training the people who come off the conveyor belt and get into positions of influence and opinion making. And now it's coming down in America, into the primary school system. And it's what I call an infiltration of a racist indoctrination into the school system in the guise of anti-racist education. And I don't know if you've noticed any in Chicago, but I think what what I'm seeing out of our in research and investigation is you're getting a situation where a lot of white kids are now turning against their parents because they're taught in schools that white kids are born of white guilt, i.e., by their white parents. I mean, this is as racist as you get, but it's being taught as anti-racism.
Yeah, I would go even a step further and say that in some cases, um, if you're not a person of color, you're taught that you're born a racist and you have to, in essence, prove that you're not a racist. And it doesn't matter how many dollars you contribute to anti-racist cause, what kind of community work you do in communities of color, whether you go out and help tutor and and mentor persons of color. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. You are proven guilty the moment you're born, and it's up to you to overcome that. The burden of proof is shifted, and that too often. I mean, I have some friends with kids who have been basically taught that, and there have been some real rifts in families. Fortunately, my daughter went to a school that where independent thought was cherished and didn't have to deal with that, and that was a factor in terms of where we sent her.
I don't know if you're familiar, Josh, with a lady by the name of Turquoise, Lejeune Parker in North Carolina. Um, she is responsible for the curriculum of young kids in her education system. And I'm going to quote something from her. She said, "It's my duty to structure a curriculum that includes all kinds of complex issues, such as police brutality, and to teach them that they may be the next victims of white supremacy through no fault of their own. We need to do it because our kids need to absolutely be part of this movement." Now, this, believe it or not, is one of Biden's go-to teachers who is teaching agitation and groupthink to impressionable young minds. So before I pass it over to you, again, I'll point out the hypocrisy about this. Have you ever heard Black Lives Matter call white privilege? Have they ever applied that to Joe Biden or to Nancy Pelosi? They may apply it to you, Josh, but they won't apply it to them until they're in power. And it's like the same as the Soviet style. Once they're in power, the leading heads of the establishments of the pre-existing party, there will be the heads to roll later on.
I'm not familiar with the professor that you mentioned, but I would say this: it doesn't surprise me. I mean, that sort of curriculum is happening all over the country, and I hear about that frequently. In terms of uh, hypocrisy, I would say this, that it's disheartening to learn that this person is one of Biden's leading go-to uh, uh, folks. My fear about Biden, and I've written about this and talked about this on other shows. Biden is, and this isn't really an age thing, because I know people Biden's age or 15 years older than him who are much sharper than me mentally. But Biden was never smart to begin with. Biden was this typical old backslapping C student politician, and he lied about his grades and he lied about a lot of things, all of which Sam Donaldson exposed in a YouTube video, which I encourage everyone to see and look at. Sam Donaldson was a liberal journalist, by the way. Biden, now you have a man who was never sharp to begin with. He graduated, I think, close to last in his law school class, losing it, showing clear signs of early to mid-stage dementia. So he is just going to be a vessel. And my fear is that people like this North Carolina teacher and others that you have mentioned are just going to be driving the policy of this country. and eventually he's not going to be he's not going to even understand what he's signing or doing. I have great fears of Biden.
Obama has an organization called Organization for Action, OFA. According to the IRA, this organization has a budget right now of $40 million. It operates out of Obama's property in Washington, D.C. The chief of staff there is Valerie Jarrett, and she was Obama's point person in early negotiations with Iran on the nuclear deal. They have 250 offices nationwide, and they have a enrollment staff of 32,000. Their purpose isn't simply a hobby for Obama. He doesn't need it for community organization. There's a purpose behind this. And this is to have these people, and they're working on it right now, to make sure they win or capture or steal the election come November. And together with that, one other thing I want to make is you can tell if my prognosis is correct by the Biden's choice of vice president. Take this point. If Susan Rice is the one selected by Biden to be his vice president, you know he was selected by Barack Obama. Now, as for Black Lives Matter, they have a war chest of $1.5 billion that have been donated to them since before and after the George Floyd incident. Now, they're not spending this on improving the lives or conditions of African Americans or minorities in inner cities like yours in Chicago. It's going to go strictly to getting people, helping with the election, and helping to drive them in power. As I said, the Democratic Party will be the Trojan horse. And if anybody knows Greek mythology, the Trojan horse was the gift given by the Greeks to the Trojans. And inside was buried the soldiers that came out at night and captured the city. The soldiers inside this Democratic Trojan horse are the radicals belonging to Black Lives Matter, the Democratic Socialists of America, people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Ayala Presley, and they have more people lined up, and they will be replacing some of the established Democrats in the upcoming elections, making it far more radical. What do you say about this, Josh? Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. I would say this. I'm going to first say that I've got to be careful here. I'm not going to condemn the entire Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, I do agree with some of what you've said about the movement, but I also know people in the movement who are good people and who are really trying to do the right thing. Okay, I do want to say this though. The Democratic Party, you are absolutely correct when you say the Democratic Party is getting more radical. That is just a fact. And my great fear is that people like AOC and Presley, Omar and Tlaib and others like her, that we're going to go not from 4 of them, okay, but we could see in the 2020 election maybe adding 8 or 10 to their ranks, and it goes on and on and on. Unless there's a pushback from the American people before that and they see what's happening, you're going to have the far left be really the dominant part of the Democratic Party. Now, I know people in the Democratic Party who don't like these folks any more than you and I do, but they don't like Trump either. And so we do need people of good faith in the Democratic Party to fight back against the radicalization and the takeover of the party. But I very much share your concerns about those members of Congress in particular, that we're going to see a lot more of them. And that's not going to be good for America, and it's not going to be good for the U.S.-Israel relationship either.
Well, I got news for you, and sad news. We saw evidence of what I'm saying, which basically, sadly, disproves what you're saying with the failure of Elliot Engel to keep his seat in New York was, and he was deposed by
Yeah.
somebody who is going to be questionable, let's say. So again, it simply goes to prove my point that the established Democrats are going to be losing out. I believe that people like Pelosi and Schumer and whatever will stay on, but once they're in there, they're going to be impotent. But and I would say that you don't have to be in the Black Lives Matter organization, or even like you and I agree that Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. We can say that without being called racists. And yes, it is altruistic. Yes, it is altruistic to say that the cops that killed George Floyd must be brought to book and everything. Absolutely. But I haven't touched on it, but I'm just going to make a passing reference to it. In all the statistics that I have got, I am totally convinced, and I know it because I've got statistics to back it up, that in fact, that more whites have been killed by cops than black people. More white people have been killed by blacks than blacks have been killed by white people. And certainly blacks kill more blacks than whites kill whites. But so on that score, go by the statistics. I also, in another program, and I'm just going to make a passing reference of this, you know what the number one killer of blacks are in America? Abortion. You know better than me about Roe v. Wade. But there's statistics that show that since Roe v. Wade was passed, 18 million black babies have been aborted. If Black Lives Matter, why hasn't Black Lives Matter organization addressed this crime? Why is it me, like an Israeli white Jew, that has to highlight this anomaly?
Well, I think in terms of abortion, you've hit an incredibly hot topic, which is somewhat of a separate topic. But you're, I mean, you're not wrong to raise it and to point it out. And I would just say that yes, I'm right of center and I'm a Republican, but I am pro-choice as well with limits. But to get to a couple of other points, you mentioned Elliot Engel losing his primary. That was hugely disappointing because he was a great friend of the U.S.-Israel relationship and also a sane Democrat. Here in Illinois, close to home, we lost Dan Lipinski, who was a pro-choice Democrat and one of the strongest U.S. advocates, one of the strongest advocates for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship in Congress across the aisle. He was a conservative Democrat. He ran against two primary opponents, both of whom are anti-Israel. And one of them will take a seat in Congress in January. That's unfortunate. And to lose a guy like that. On your point about where Black lives are being lost and violence against blacks by police in the comparison to whites, I would commend your viewers to an incredible podcast that I heard a few weeks ago by a progressive, liberal, Jewish man by the name of Sam Harris. A lot of your viewers may have heard of him. And he, in that podcast, goes into an hour and a half, citing footnotes and studies and details, showing all of the things that you mentioned are true. And he goes into a lot of other studies as well. So, but you don't hear about that in the mainstream media. I put that podcast up on my blog, got a lot of feedback from it. And people who actually listen to it, you can't disagree with it because it's backed by studies. I'm talking about Harvard studies, not far left conspiracy studies. But the cognitive dissonance of the left, of my friends on the left, to actually acknowledge that is it's sad. They just won't. They are convinced that most of the police, law enforcement in this country are out there and motivated by racism, and you're not going to be able to convince them otherwise, unfortunately.
Well, you and I have points with regard to abortion, but in my opinion, it really points when it comes to, like I mentioned, the numbers are astounding and the percentages are astounding about how many black babies are lost. I mean, if you're belonging and believe in the morality of Black Lives Matter, this is essential. But basically, what I want to make is this really points to the systemic fault in black social conditions that has been perpetrated, like you pointed out, for decades by democratic misrule, and quite frankly, they don't care about it. And that is a sin in itself. But again, it also points to what I want to come to is what your viewers, and the viewers, I implore you to go to the Black Lives Matter website and go to their page in What We Believe. You will find that the problem here is instead of going back or teaching the African Americans and other minorities to stay in the traditional family fold, they go completely the opposite. Let me quote this, which is part of the mission statement of Black Lives Matter. We dismantle the patriotic practice that requires mother to work double shifts. Patriarchal practice is the one which is a family which is based in father, mother, and children. And again, let me quote just to prove that Black Lives Matter, part of their agenda is to dismantle not just the police, but the traditional family as we know it. I quote, we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended family and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers and children are comfortable. What are they replacing the traditional family with a sort of kibbutz type arrangement? Give me a break. Those are two values that I want to tell you. When you read the mission statement, Josh, of Black Lives Matter, you'll find that it's part of their agenda to dismantle not just statues, but to dismantle the four pillars of which America is unique. And that is the family structure, faith and the believing God, the economy, and democracy.
Yeah, I look. I will look at the website. There are a number of Black Lives Matter affiliated movement websites. I will look at that, and that is disconcerting if that appears on there, because what we need in America, and this is not just in the Black community or the Hispanic community or the white, this is across America. We need more family structure. We need stronger families in America. And anything in any organization that's going to try to dismantle the family in America, that's about the last thing we need right now in this country with all of the problems we have. So we ought to be fighting against that.
And I want to come on now as our final segment, basically, the role of American Jews in this, because as an outsider and as an Israeli and as a Jew, I'm dismayed by what I'm seeing in the American Jewish community. The American Jews, just to finish on the role that I said last time, seem to be in a state of denial about the aims or ignorance about the aims of the Black Lives Matter movement momentum. And it seems they haven't read their mission statement. I can't believe that any American Jew who has any faith, believes in God, believes in family, believes in the democratic system in America, that they could continue to support a Black Lives Matter Marxist organization. I'm not talking about the hashtag of Black Lives Matter. That's important too. Because what you're going to find is once they take power, I'll give you just one example, that Ilhan Omar, for instance, is a member of the US Foreign Affairs Committee. And it could well be that under a Democrat president, a Democrat House, and a Democrat Senate, Ilhan Omar could be the chair of the US Foreign Affairs Committee? And what sort of foreign policy do you think that she and others will be creating for the new America? And
Well,
if
that is
American Jews are not concerned about that, they ought to be.
so. I want to talk about your point, American Jews generally, um, and let's break it down. There are American secular Jews, and I'm a secular Jew, but I'm a rarity among secular Jews in that I'm a political conservative. But there are a number of us. It's not. I'm not saying I'm that exotic, but we're definitely in the minority. But we're a vocal minority. And then there's the Orthodox community, which thankfully is the fastest growing part of American Jewry, which is overwhelmingly Republican and supportive of our president and the like. So they're going to see things differently, and they have been suffering. You're well aware of what's been going on in Brooklyn in the Hasidic communities with the violence against Jews who are outwardly Jewish and what's happening to them there. But I would say this, that the American Jewish community, I do agree with you. The secular Jewish community is in denial about what is going on and some of the aims of movements aligned against this, and particularly these members of Congress that we mentioned earlier. And sadly, too many of them are part of the far left and part of the very much intertwined with these movements. And so it's something that, you know, is very distressing to me. It's almost like with some of these folks, um, you know, Jewish lives matter are about the last thing they care about, and it's more focused on other ethnic groups.
I want to tell you that the Jewish organizations in America took a leading role in the civil rights movement. They ought to be able to hold their head up high, and they ought to have the spine to tell these people to leave us alone, leave the Jews in America alone because we helped you. And they have nothing to apologize about. And I wouldn't expect that any American Jews should be informed by the organization of BLM that they have Jewish, white guilt and white privilege. They've done a lot for the civil rights movement. And to make these accusations of the Jews in America, and as well as Israel, that is outright anti-Semitism and that's racist. Hand it over to you, Josh.
Yeah, I'm glad you referenced the great struggle in the civil rights movement and the fact that American Jews were right there with that. I think that's something our community can be proud of. There was a real need, and it continues to be a need to address racial injustice in this country. But that doesn't mean that we need to align ourselves with radical groups. And I would just hope that through the great work you're doing, Barry, educating with the show, with all the writings that you do, with your followers on social media, that we can, through education, turn some of this around and get people in our community focused on supporting legitimate groups and legitimate aims and the like, but not supporting radical groups. And let's end the show on an optimistic note that through the great work that you're doing and others are doing, that can happen.
Okay. Josh, I want to thank you for joining me. From your mouth to Black Lives' ears, or at least God's ears. Thanks, Josh. I look forward to being in contact with you as we do on frequent or infrequent occasions. I hope to see you here in Israel as soon as the Wuhan virus eases and we're allowed flights between the States and Israel. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, Barry. We were planning to be there this summer, as we're there every summer, but obviously COVID stopped that. So I'm always excited to get together with you in person, but it's great to see you virtually.